At several points in your academic life, your professor will ask you to read an article or a chapter of a book and write a reaction paper afterwards. How do you do that? How is it different from a reflection paper? Let's find out. Hello guys, Teacher Algae here. Welcome back to another video lesson. So in this video, we're going to learn how to write a reaction paper. Before we start, let me warn you that this video is going to be long. But I will create timestamps so you can easily navigate through the different sections of the video. I guess the first question that comes to mind is, what is a reaction paper? A reaction paper contains your opinions and critical analysis of a reading or even multimedia materials like audio or video materials. Well, first of all, they are very similar. In both a reflection and reaction paper, you reflect or think deeply on the points of the author and how you can apply them in your life. But in a reaction paper, you cannot just stop right there. You have to go beyond that. You need to critically evaluate the content, what the author wrote, the points he made, the illustrations he gave, and the style, how he presented his ideas. In other words, in a reaction paper, you can disagree, give additional points, and evaluate the thinking of the author. Whereas with a reflection paper, you don't need to do those things. Think of it this way. When you watch a movie, you don't just think about how the movie touched you. You also analyze and critique the storyline, the characters, the cinematography, the acting, and whatnot. And while you're doing them, opinions form in your mind. The ending should have been different. That scene should have been shot from a different angle. And those things require high level of critical thinking skills. And that's exactly what your professor wants to measure as you write your reaction paper. Okay, let's have an overview of the parts of a reaction paper. Typically, it should have an introduction. And in your introduction, you need to write the name of the article or the chapter from which book you got it from, and of course, the author. Then you need to write the thesis statement of the article, and finally, a brief summary of the material. The body part, of course, contains your reactions, and they can be answers to the following questions. First, what are the points of the author you agree with? Second, what are the points of the author you disagree with? And the last one, how can you apply what you learned in your life and/or ministry? Lastly, the conclusion. In the conclusion, you will answer the question, what is the significance of the material for a larger context? The society, the church, etc. Okay, now that we know what the reaction paper is in its basic outline, let's find out the steps we need to take in writing a reaction paper. Step 1. Understand the material thoroughly. Read it several times. Make sure that you understand the author's main point or thesis statement, because if you do, you can know how each major point relates to it. Also, while you're reading, you can start writing down points that you find interesting. Let me give you a warning at this point. One of the worst things someone can do is to write a reaction paper without fully understanding the material he is reacting on. I have had some students in the past who misunderstood the major points of the article, and as a result, they quoted the author out of context or put him in a bad light unnecessarily. So we should try our hardest to understand first the article before writing our reactions. That's what we do in our everyday life, right? We don't react until we know what is happening. We ask questions, we discover facts, we try to find out the context, and only then can we react. Step 2. Write the introduction. As I said in the beginning, your introduction should contain the following details: the author, the name of the article or what chapter in the name of the book, the thesis statement, and the summary. When it comes to writing the summary, make it very short. And I mean really short, because this is not a summary paper, it's a reaction paper. Your professor simply wants to see that you have a good general understanding of the points of the author. How short, you may ask? I recommend just maybe 5 to 8 sentences. Look at this example. Francis Chan, in the article, Why We Need to Throw Out the Term Good Christian, is challenging Christians to do away from the term good Christians because, according to him, it is easy for anyone to claim he is a good Christian. Instead, he points out that we should be asking ourselves if we are good Christs, because we are called to live as Jesus lived. He was challenging his readers to examine their lives against Christ's as portrayed in the Bible. He pointed out that Christians in America have misconstrued success as popularity when biblical success is living like Jesus. And according to him, this lack of pursuit to become like Jesus might be the reason that many unbelievers in America are antagonistic towards Christians. Step 3. Write the points you agree with and why. You can use direct quotations or paraphrases to mention what point or points of the author you agree with. Make sure to choose the major points of the article. As a starting point, you might want to agree with the author's thesis statement. That is, if you really agree with his thesis statement. And of course, you don't just agree with the author. You show why you agree. This is your chance to show that you have thought carefully about the article and that you are able to relate it to your previous knowledge, your situation, or your current context. Write one paragraph for each point you agree with, and make sure that your paragraph have unity and coherence. Just because this is a reaction paper doesn't mean that you will ignore altogether everything you learned about writing a paragraph. Remember that your paragraph still should have unity and coherence. How many paragraphs should you write? Well, it depends on your professor. Sometimes your professor would tell you to write a certain number of points you have to agree with, but if he doesn't, then it's up to you. Personally, I think the ideal number is 2 to 3 points. So 2 to 3 paragraphs. Okay, let's look at an example and try to analyze it. I agree with the author that it is high time that we as Christians redefine our criteria of success when it comes to living the Christian life. Like what he pointed out, we live in a day and time when being a Christian has been reduced to merely going to church, believing certain doctrines, and avoiding certain sins. And this has resulted to a do what is right in your own eyes version of Christianity. Because of this, we have a number of so-called Christians who live very much like the world. However, when we set Jesus as the standard, there would be little to no room for subjectivity. That is, no serious follower of Christ would say, "Each to his own, you cannot judge me. I will live my Christian life the way I think is right. Mind your own business." Okay, with this example, you can see that in the first 2 sentences, I first identified the statement of the author that I agree with. I used a paraphrase instead of a direct quotation. Well, there's no problem with the direct quotation, but in my opinion, if you're able to paraphrase what the author wrote, that could show your professor that you have a deep understanding of the material versus if you just include a direct quotation. And in the next sentences, I talked about the reasons why I agree with the author. I presented what I thought is happening among the many churches right now. Step 4. Write things you disagree with or any problem with the author's thinking. Well, yes, you can disagree with the author. As I said in the beginning, this is one of the ways that makes a reaction paper different from a reflection paper. But before you disagree with anything the author said, please remember these things. First, make sure that you understand clearly what the author is saying. Is that what he really means by saying that, or does he mean something else? Many times I find my students disagreeing with the author's points simply because they misunderstood them. And I would tell them, it is your responsibility to second guess yourself that maybe you misunderstood the author. So if you need to ask help to understand the author's points, go ahead, do it. Also, recognize the author might be saying it because of his context, because of his culture. You can disagree with him, but make sure that you acknowledge the context in which he wrote the article. I'll show you how to do that later. Lastly, if you really have to disagree respectfully. Like, instead of saying, I disagree with the author, maybe you can write, there are some things that the author wrote that I find hard to agree with. Or you can also write, with all due respect to the author, I beg to differ in what he said that we should not read other books except the Bible. Then after that, give strong reasons why you disagree. Also, notice that in the first example, there is an acknowledgement that you understand the context in which the author wrote his article. If I understand it correctly, in his context, many people prefer Christian books to the Bible. But I also believe that God wants us to also learn from the lives of His people, even outside the Bible. When you do something like this, your professor will appreciate your critical thinking skills and your being objective. You don't just look at your side, you also look at where the author is coming from. But what if you have nothing to disagree with? Well, believe it or not, this is what makes a reaction paper very challenging. Normally, your professors will assign you articles from excellent, highly educated authors, and they are so good, you find nothing in their writing you can disagree with. So some students would just give up and not write anything in this part. And some even ask, why does my professor want me to disagree with the author? Well, he doesn't want you to disagree with the author and play an expert. But he simply wants you to use your critical thinking skills, because if you only agree with everything the author said, your professor would say, this student did not think critically, or this student has poor analytical thinking skills. So, what should you do? First, remember that the authors are usually Westerners. Western people might see things from a different lens. This is where you can disagree or offer a different perspective. You can especially talk about your own context. For example, I don't necessarily disagree with the author, but I think the point he's making cannot work in our context in Vietnam. He said, and then identify the point, then give the reason, evidences why it's not going to work in your context. Secondly, you can also offer additional points or examples that can help the author accomplish his purpose. Look at this example. I understand that the author had one purpose in mind when he wrote this short article. That is, to persuade people to examine their lives if they are living like Jesus or not, and eventually make it their life's pursuit to pattern their lives after Christ's. If this were a longer article, however, The author could have zeroed in on the specific qualities, mindset, or attitude of Jesus that readers can start with as they seek to evaluate their lives. Doing so, I believe, will help launch his readers to deeper reflection, thereby resulting to a stronger resolve to follow Jesus. I think a good starting point would be Jesus' focus on eternity. The Gospels are replete with Jesus' admonitions for his followers to live their lives on earth in light of eternity. Nowadays, a lot of Christians are living with little or no care about eternity. They are contented with the fact that they are going to heaven, but their priorities reveal that they are not mindful of eternity. Hence, the author will do well to single this out as he had done in his other books and articles. That was long, wasn't it? Lastly, consider the possibility that maybe the author needed to elaborate some more points in the chapter or article to avoid possible confusion. Let's look at this example. Another thing that the author could do is to help his non-American readers understand the context of American Christianity, especially in what specific ways the American churches pursue success in the form of popularity. Providing such context can help them get a better understanding of where Francis Chan is coming from and why he was making the points he was making, which can result to them better contextualizing his points in the article. The more I assign Francis Chan's articles to my ESL students residing in Asia and Africa, the more I realize how oblivious many of them are about what is going on in American churches since they live in a completely different context where Christianity is but a minor religion. So, in summary, if you cannot disagree with the author, you can first consider the possibility that perhaps what the author is saying is not applicable in your context. Second, offer additional points or examples that can help the author better accomplish his purpose. Third, ask the author to elaborate more or provide context for some of his points. By doing these things, you'll be able to show your professor that you have high level of critical thinking skills. Step 5. Write your application. Now, after analysis, it's time for you to talk about how you can apply what you learned in your life and ministry. Although reaction paper is an academic paper, your professor is not just concerned about how well you analyze the article, but also how it has impacted you personally. It comes from the philosophy of what we call transformative learning. Our learning should result to life transformation. It should impact you in a personal way. Here are some tips in writing your applications. Number 1, be specific and practical. Don't give general or vague applications. They have to be doable. Number 2, talk about how the article influenced you to change your mind and how it will result to a change of action. Number 3, be personal. Be vulnerable if necessary. You don't need to be dramatic, but the more personal your application is, the more your professor can see that you've deeply internalized the things you learned from the article. Here's an example. As an application, I want to make it my goal to live, think, and make decisions like Jesus did. One very practical thing I can do is to ask myself constantly, what would Jesus do if he were in my shoes? It is a simple question, but it can have serious ramifications as evidenced by Charles Sheldon's book, In His Steps, What Would Jesus Do? Recently, I lost patience while I was talking to someone, and afterwards, instead of being remorseful, I found myself reasoning out, I'm no Jesus, I'm only human. However, Having read Francis Chan's article, I realized that I can no longer use that as an excuse because ultimately, it is God's will that I become like Jesus. And not only does He command me to live like Jesus did, but He also gives me the grace through His Holy Spirit to do so. Therefore, I should deny myself, follow Jesus' footsteps, and live by faith daily that He is enabling me to become more and more like Him as I do so. And we're down to the last part of our reaction paper, the conclusion. In this part, talk about the importance of the article for the society or your generation or the community or the church at large. Is it important for people to read it? How will this article impact families, the society as a whole, or the church? So in the application part, you talked about yourself. In the conclusion, go outside of yourself and talk about a bigger context. Consider this example. In conclusion, Francis Chan's article is a must-read for serious Bible-believing Christians. Albeit short, it can be God's instrument to awaken individuals and churches. Specifically, our churches at large will benefit greatly if we adhere to a common goal of becoming like Jesus in our character and priorities, because this will result to stronger accountability to one another, which is the very thing we need in order to proclaim the gospel to the ever-becoming antagonistic world. Okay, let's summarize the things we covered in this video. First, we talked about what a reaction paper is and how it is different from a reflection paper. Second, we talked about the outline of a reaction paper. And third, we talked about the steps we need to take to write a reaction paper. That concludes our video lesson on how to write a reaction paper. I hope that after watching this video, you're feeling a bit more confident to write your own reaction paper. My part here is done. Now it's your turn to apply what you've learned. Remember, in learning English, use it or lose it. Teacher Alcer here. I'll see you in the next video.